Pay attention to the woman walking to her car at 11:09 p.m. with clinic keys already in her right hand. Her name is Dr. Carla Reyes. She is 34 years old. She built her dental practice from nothing and sent money home to Cebu every month for 8 years without missing once. 4 days ago she found cameras. 14 months of cameras. She had never once been alone. Watch how she walks now. Eyes moving before her feet do, left, right, over her shoulder, left again. Her heart is shivering. Not pounding. Shivering. She grips those keys like a weapon because keys were the only weapon she had time to think of. She stops for half a second before stepping into the open lot. Her body knows something her mind cannot name. She told herself tomorrow she would leave. File the report. Go somewhere safe. Tomorrow. The man in Bay 114 has been sitting with his engine off for 41 minutes. He painted the camera blind 2 nights ago. He knows exactly which bay she uses. She does not know any of this. She is walking toward her car. She is walking toward him. She does not make it. The cleaning crew supervisor found her at 5:52 in the morning. Rajan Pereira had worked the early shift at Al Raha Mall for 6 years and had developed the particular attentiveness of someone whose job requires noticing what does not belong. An unlocked door, a spill before someone slips, a vehicle that sat through an entire shift and was still sitting at the start of the next one without a ticket or a reason. He noticed the white Toyota Yaris in Bay 117 first. It had been there when he finished the previous night, engine off, unattended, sitting in the same position as if the person who parked it had simply not come back. He walked toward it with his clipboard to note the plate number for mall management. Standard procedure. A thing he had done dozens of times over 6 years without it meaning anything beyond a note in a log. He passed Bay 116. He passed Bay 115. At Bay 114 he stopped walking and did not move again for nearly a full minute. Dr. Carla Reyes was on the ground between the front of her Yaris and the concrete pillar of Bay 113. On her back. Clinic keys in her right hand, fingers still closed around the grip the way a person holds something they are about to use. Not loosely, not dropped, but held with the specific tension of a hand that was reaching for a car door when the reaching stopped. Her leather tote bag lay 3 feet away, open at the zip, wallet inside, phone inside, 340 dirhams in cash visible through the opening, a folded receipt, a small cosmetics pouch, the clinic lanyard still looped through the handle. Every item in its place. Nothing disturbed. The bag had not been opened by anyone other than its owner. The cash had not been touched. Nothing had been removed from level B2 of Al Raha Mall except Carla Reyes herself. 34 years old, on her back on polished concrete under the flat indifferent light of the overhead fluorescence, while the rest of the mall sat completely unaware in the floors above her, and the city continued in the darkness outside and no one who loved her yet knew. Rajan Pereira called mall security at 5:52 a.m. Mall security called Abu Dhabi police at 5:57. The first patrol unit arrived at 6:11. The scene was secured at 6:14. Detective Fatima Al-Zabi of the Abu Dhabi Police Criminal Investigation Department arrived at 7:03 a.m. and stood at the scene perimeter for 4 minutes before she walked inside it. This was not hesitation and it was not procedure. It was the habit of a detective who had learned over 14 years that the individual pieces of a scene, once you began examining them, had a way of narrowing your vision before you had absorbed the whole, that the first thing you looked at closely had a tendency to become the frame through which you looked at everything else, and that the frame could be wrong. She stood at the perimeter and she took the whole thing in before she allowed herself any piece of it. Al-Zabi had worked criminal investigations since she was 29 years old. She had worked contract fraud, organized theft, domestic cases that ended in the worst way, and 3 prior homicides. She had a methodical temperament and a specific quality that officers who worked alongside her consistently described in after-action reviews. She did not move toward conclusions. She built toward them from facts that had been allowed to accumulate without pressure, and she held early conclusions at a careful distance until the facts made them unavoidable. It was slower than the way some detectives worked. It was more reliable. For minutes at the perimeter. 3 observations. First, the leather tote bag. Open, cash visible, every item undisturbed. This was not a robbery. A robbery that ends in a killing does not leave 340 dirhams sitting in an open bag 3 feet from the body. The person who had done this had not needed anything Carla Reyes was carrying. Whatever they had come to the parking level to take from her was not in the bag. This established, in the first 2 minutes of Al-Zabi's presence at the scene, the most fundamental fact of the case. The victim had been targeted specifically. Not for what she had on her, for who she was. Second, the CCTV camera mounted above bays 111 through 117 had a coating of dried gray paint across its lens. Applied carefully, at a deliberate downward angle, in a thin and even layer, in a manner that read from ground level as a shadow on the camera housing rather than as the deliberate obstruction it was. Al-Zabi had been in enough parking structures to know the difference between a camera that had been accidentally obscured and a camera that had been neutralized by someone who understood the difference between visible tampering and invisible tampering. This was invisible tampering done well. Every camera in every other section of level B2 was fully functional. The cameras covering bays 101 through 110 were functional. The cameras covering bays 119 through 130 were functional. The single 7-bay section centered on bay 114, the section that contained bay 117, where the white Toyota Yaris was parked, where Carla Reyes had parked for 3 years, was blind. The forensic analysis of the paint layer would later establish it had been applied 48 hours before the murder. Not the night of. 2 days before, during which time the modified camera had sat in place looking functional from a distance while recording nothing. Third, the access stairwell at the north end of level B2, 40 feet from bay 113. It connected to a side street on the mall's exterior, and Al-Zabi walked to that street herself before she left the mall that morning and confirmed what she had suspected. No active camera coverage on that street between 11 p.m. and 6 a.m. A gap in the surveillance infrastructure that a person would only know about if they had specifically looked for it. Dead camera. Concrete pillar. Stairwell exit to an uncovered street. 40 feet of geometry, each element deliberate, each element chosen. She stood inside the architecture of it and understood it as the product of prior planning. Not rushed planning, not improvised, but the kind of planning that requires multiple site visits, requires returning before dawn on a Tuesday to address the camera, requires knowing which bay a specific woman used and when she worked late and how she walked from the elevator to her car. This was not a crime decided in the parking level in a moment of opportunity. It had been decided somewhere else at some earlier moment and executed here with the patience of someone who did not improvise. Because they had prepared well enough not to need to. Al-Zabi walked the complete level before she left the scene. Every bay, every camera housing, every stairwell entrance, the full perimeter of the level from north wall to south. She noted everything. She was gone by 9:30 a.m. She carried one conclusion out with her, held carefully, not yet attached to any name. Whoever had done this knew Carla Reyes with specificity. They knew her bay number and her working hours and the geometry of the level where she parked and the location of the stairwell that would let them leave without passing a functioning camera. That was not the knowledge of proximity. That was the knowledge of sustained attention, accumulated over time, organized, applied. The forensic pathology report arrived at her desk 3 days later. She read it in sequence, section by section, in the flat clinical language that reduces the worst things to their measurable components. Cause of death. Manual strangulation, consistent with a large male hand. Time of death estimated between 11 o'clock and 11:30 p.m. No significant defensive wounds on the victim's hands or forearms. The attack had been controlled and rapid, delivered without hesitation by someone who knew what they intended to do and did not deviate from it at any point. The victim had not had time to use the keys she was still holding when found. The report continued. Al-Zabi read each section. In section 4, 7 lines below the cause of death notation, written in the same measured clinical register as everything preceding it, was a secondary finding. A detail the forensic pathologist had documented with the same professional neutrality applied to everything else in the report, as if its weight were equivalent to the weight of the other findings, as if a notation in section 4 were simply a notation in section 4. Al-Zabi read it once. She set the report on her desk. She looked at the window for a long moment without seeing the window. Then she picked the report back up and read section 4 again. She did not share it with anyone outside the core investigation team for 11 days. When she finally did, in a briefing that had been convened around the toll gate records and the recovered SIM data and the first fragments of the text thread, she read it aloud without preface. The room was quiet when she finished reading it. The quiet lasted long enough to mean something. Then the briefing continued. But the case that had already been a premeditated murder became, in that room, something else as well. Something that restructured the timeline and the motive and the precise understanding of what Taric Almansuri had decided in those 72 hours and why the decision had not been difficult for him to make. Al-Zabi opened the case file. She wrote Carla Reyes's name at the top of the first page. She set section 4 face up at the front of the file where she would see it every time she opened it. She began building. Carla Santos Reyes arrived in the UAE 8 years before she died in a parking level with her keys in her hand. She came from Cebu City with a dental degree, a licensing exam scheduled for the following March, and the resolve of someone who has made an honest accounting of the distance between where they are and where they intend to be and decided, without illusion, that they are willing to cross it. She was the eldest of 3 children. Her father had left when she was 11. Her mother Remedios had worked double factory shifts to keep the household together and told Carla from early on that education was the only thing no one could remove from you once you had earned it. Carla treated this as instruction rather than comfort and studied accordingly. She passed the UAE Dental Licensing Board on her first attempt. She spent 3 years as an associate at 2 clinics, learning the regulatory landscape, saving methodically, building a patient base through the kind of steady competence that does not announce itself but accumulates into a reputation over time. She signed the lease on Suite 204 of the Caladia Medical Complex, paid for the nameplate outside the door from her own savings, and called Remedios in Cebu City the evening it went up. Within 2 years, the patient waiting list ran 3 weeks out. She renewed for 9 years. She sent money home every month without missing once. She kept a kitchen wall calendar, appointments in red, personal reminders in blue, and an Arabic textbook on her nightstand tabbed with post-it notes in her own handwriting because she had been in this country for 8 years and intended to stay and believed that intending to stay meant doing the work of belonging to a place rather than merely residing in it. Her apartment in Al Reef communicated who she was more accurately than most introductions could. Everything organized, everything considered, nothing left unfinished. The framed family photograph near the entrance. Her mother and 2 brothers, Christmas afternoon, everyone squinting into the sun. The closet arranged by color. The calendar. The textbook on chapter 9, marked carefully, the chapters behind it already worn at the edges from use. She was a person who maintained her environment the way someone maintains their environment when they have learned not to depend on anyone else to keep it stable. Everything visible. Everything in its place. She had been that way her whole life. Which is why, when the thing that had been hidden inside her visible life finally surfaced, she recognized it for exactly what it was. The device was a shared tablet she and Taric Almansuri had used during the relationship for travel bookings and shared calendar access, the ordinary administrative infrastructure of 2 people conducting a life together in the margins of other obligations. She had accessed it on a Wednesday evening to troubleshoot a connectivity issue. The connection was routed through a partition she did not recognize. She followed it. Behind a folder labeled with a sequence of numbers rather than a name was an archive. Organized, labeled, dated. Thousands of hours of footage sorted by location and time, going back 19 months. 5 months before she had agreed to a first dinner. 5 months before she had known his name as anything beyond a patient's name in her appointment system. She sat with what she was looking at for a long time before she moved. The footage was sorted into 4 location folders. The first was labeled with the address of the Caladia Medical Complex, her dental surgery, Suite 204, filmed from the frame of the wall-mounted mirror near the treatment chair, a camera so small the forensic team would later require magnification equipment to extract it. The footage showed her working, speaking to her clinic assistant, eating lunch at her desk alone, making Sunday phone calls to her mother with the surgery door closed. The second folder was labeled with her home address in Al Reef. The footage from this location came from the smoke alarm housing in her bedroom ceiling, the alarm Taric had offered to service 8 months into the relationship, the one she had handed him the stepladder for without a second thought. The third folder was labeled with a model number she did not initially recognize. When she cross-referenced it, she understood. It was the model number of the reading glasses she wore for close work in the surgery. The glasses he had asked to examine once, holding them carefully, saying the frames looked slightly bent, offering to straighten them. The footage from this folder showed her world from the inside of her own eyeline, Her own vision replicated, her own perspective captured, her face never visible because the camera was where her eyes were. She had been used as the lens. The fourth folder she opened last. It was labeled with nothing. Inside was footage from a fixed angle she recognized immediately. The entrance of her apartment, low and slightly left of center. The frame of the family photograph. Her mother. Her brothers. Christmas afternoon. Everyone squinting into the sun. He had put a camera inside the photograph of her family. Every time she came home and looked at it, she had looked directly into his surveillance. Every private moment she had in the space between the front door and the rest of her life had been recorded and filed and stored on a partition she would never have found if the connection had not been routing incorrectly on a Wednesday evening. She closed the partition. She sat in her apartment in the particular stillness of a person absorbing something that requires complete rearrangement of what they thought they knew. Then she did what she always did when she had decided something. She prepared carefully. She copied the drive onto an external device she kept in the back of her desk drawer. She waited 2 days. She called Grace Domingo on Wednesday evening and told her enough. Not everything, but enough. She said she had found something on a shared device. She said she had been watched for a long time and she now knew by whom. She said she was giving him 72 hours to present himself to authorities before she walked in herself. Grace told her not to wait. Carla said she understood. She said she would handle it. Grace would replay that phone call for years afterward. The way Carla's voice sounded measured rather than frightened. The way she said she would handle it, the way she said everything, as if she had already finished the calculation and was simply reporting the result. Grace had told her to go immediately. Carla had said she understood. She had said good night. She had disconnected. Grace had sat with her phone in her hand for a long time after that, telling herself Carla was the most capable person she knew in this country and that capable people handled things and that 72 hours was not a long time. Taric Almansuri received the confrontation on Wednesday evening at her apartment. Carla showed him the copied drive. She told him what it contained. She told him she had the original and the copy and that she was giving him until Saturday to go to authorities himself. She was not hysterical. She was precise, in the way she was precise about everything, direct, organized, stating the facts without embellishment. She told him she was not negotiating. She told him to leave. He left without raising his voice. He was calm in the way a person is calm when they have already stopped reacting and started calculating. He drove home. He did not call his attorney. He did not attempt to persuade her or contact her again through his personal phone. He purchased a prepaid SIM the following morning. He used it to call her 31 times over the next 11 days. She answered the first call. It lasted 2 minutes and 17 seconds. After that, she answered nothing. The 72 hours she had given him he spent not preparing to turn himself in but preparing the parking level at Al Raha Mall with the same methodical patience he had applied to everything else. Identifying the bay, mapping the stairwell exit, sourcing the maintenance uniform, returning before dawn on a Tuesday to paint the camera lens in a thin, even layer at a downward angle that would read from ground level as a shadow. Then he went to work on Wednesday morning and attended a team meeting and contributed 3 agenda items and waited for Thursday evening. He had built a system around Carla Reyes to ensure she could never leave without him knowing. When she found the system and decided to dismantle it, he made sure she could not leave at all. Taric Almansuri had been a patient at Suite 204 for 6 months before Carla agreed to dinner. This is the fact that the investigation kept returning to, not because it was unusual for a patient to become something else over time, but because of what the forensic timeline eventually established. The first camera had been installed in the surgery 4 months into those 6 months. 2 months before the first dinner. 2 months before Carla had any reason to think of him as anything other than the man in Bay 3 on Tuesday afternoons who asked careful questions and tipped the clinic assistant at the holidays. He had begun building the surveillance architecture before she agreed to trust him. He had begun before she had any choice in the matter. The device he used was not amateur equipment. Investigators from the Abu Dhabi Police Digital Forensics Unit, working in coordination with a specialist contractor brought in from the Federal Cybercrime Division, spent 3 weeks tracing the procurement chain. The cameras were microscopic, wireless, commercially sourced through a third-party supplier operating across 3 jurisdictions, paid for through a shell account that routed payments through a freelance IT services invoice. Clean, deliberate. The kind of procurement structure a man builds when he has both the technical literacy to understand what he needs and the professional experience to understand how to acquire it without creating a direct record. Taric Almansuri had spent 11 years reviewing contracts in the oil and gas sector. He understood procurement. He understood paper trails. He understood exactly which threads, if pulled, needed to lead somewhere other than him. For locations. The surgery first. The camera was embedded in the frame of the wall-mounted mirror adjacent to the treatment chair, installed during a patient appointment in which Taric had requested a moment to use the restroom and Carla had stepped out of the room to take a call at the reception desk. The forensic team recovered the device using magnification equipment. It was 4 millimeters in its longest dimension. It had been transmitting continuously for 19 months. The footage it had captured in that time included Carla working, Carla speaking to her clinic assistant about patient cases, Carla eating lunch alone at her desk with the door open, Carla making her Sunday phone calls to Remedios in Cebu with the door closed. It included consultations, treatment sessions, private conversations between a dentist and her patients conducted in the reasonable belief that the room was what it appeared to be. A professional space, closed, private, belonging to the person whose name was on the door outside. The second camera was in the smoke alarm housing in Carla's bedroom ceiling in Al Reef. Taric had offered to service the alarm approximately 8 months into the relationship. He had noticed it was the older model, he said, the kind with a battery that needed annual replacement. He would do it if she had a stepladder. She had the stepladder in the utility room. She had handed it to him without a second thought because that is what you do when someone in your life offers to do something useful and there is no reason yet to read intention into helpfulness. He had been on the ladder for 4 minutes. The forensic team found the device in the housing on the first sweep. It was slightly newer than the alarm itself, installed flush against the interior wall of the housing so that the alarm's LED test light obscured this transmitter pin from any casual inspection. It had been there for 14 months. The third location was the reading glasses. The model number Carla had found in the archives folder label matched the frames she wore for close work in the surgery, a lightweight titanium frame she had bought from an optical shop in Caladia 2 years prior. Taric had picked them up from her desk during a visit to the clinic, turning them over in his hands, saying the frame looked slightly bent at the left hinge, offering to take them to an optician he knew who did precision adjustments. She had let him. He had returned them the following day, the hinge corrected. The chip in the modified left lens housing was thinner than a matchstick head and transmitted a continuous video signal from the perspective of her own eyeline, her own vision captured. The footage from this folder showed the world as Carla saw it. Her patients' faces, her instrument trays, the street outside when she walked, Grace Domingo's face across a dinner table, the pages of the Arabic textbook. Footage of a woman's life recorded from behind her own eyes without her knowledge. The forensic technician who extracted the chip from the frame set it on the evidence tray and did not speak for a moment before she documented it. The fourth location was the family photograph. Fixed angle, low and slightly left of center, framing the entrance of the Al Reef apartment. Every arrival, every departure, every moment between the front door and the interior of her own home had been recorded and stored in an unlabeled folder, on a hidden partition on a shared device she had no reason to suspect and every reason to trust. The photograph showed her mother and brothers against a Christmas afternoon in Cebu. She had looked at it every time she came home for 2 years. She had looked directly into his camera every single time. The archive, when forensic technician Hind Al-Khoury completed the full extraction and cataloged its contents, contained 19 months of footage across 4 locations. The organization of it was, in the assessment of the forensic psychologist who reviewed the structure for the prosecution, the most significant detail of the entire archive. More significant than any individual piece of footage it contained. The folders were dated. The subfolders were labeled by event type. There were cross-reference tags linking footage from different locations that captured the same time window, so that a Sunday phone call to Remedios, for example, was simultaneously indexed under the surgery location folder and the glasses folder, creating a synchronized record from 2 angles. This was not a man who had installed cameras in a panic or in the grip of an obsessive episode he could not control. This was a man who had designed an information management system and maintained it with professional consistency over 19 months. He had not been watching Carla Reyes the way a person watches someone they are afraid of losing. He had been cataloging her the way a person catalogs something they believe they own. At the top of the directory, above the 4 location folders, was a single folder created 19 months before the murder, 5 months before the first dinner, 2 months before the first camera. Contained no footage. It contained one document. A text file with no title, opened and edited on multiple occasions across the following months. Its most recent edit timestamped 6 days before Carla found the archive. The document was 41 lines long. It was a record of observation, not surveillance footage but written notes, the kind a person makes when they are studying something and want to track what they learn. Carla's schedule, her routines, the names of her clinic assistant and her regular patients, her Sunday call times, the route she walked from the medical complex to the parking level at Al Raha Mall, the bay number she used, Bay 117. He had been taking notes on Carla Reyes before he put a single camera in her surgery. He had been studying her from the waiting room of Suite 20 for while she treated other patients, while she spoke to her assistant, while she moved through the ordinary professional rhythms of her day, and he had written it down. The text file was the foundation. The cameras were the infrastructure he built on top of it. The archive was what the infrastructure produced. And all of it, the notes, the cameras, the 19 months of footage organized into cross-reference folders, was what he had built because 3 women had left him and he had decided, in the specific way a man with both the intelligence and the damage to act on a decision like this, that the next one would not be able to. When Carla copied the drive onto the external device in her desk drawer and sat in her apartment waiting for the right moment to make the call, she was sitting inside the frame of the 4th camera. The footage from that evening, her at the desk, still, the external drive beside the tablet, the family photograph behind her on the shelf, was still in the archive when investigators extracted it. It was the last entry in the unlabeled folder before the transmission cut off the night the warrant was executed at Taric's villa and the server was seized. The last thing the camera in her family's photograph recorded was Carla Reyes deciding to end it. Al-Zabi requested the voluntary interview through Taric Almansuri's employer's legal liaison on March 19. She described the matter as a routine inquiry related to a commercial facility incident in the area. She did not specify the facility. She did not name the victim. She gave no detail that would indicate the nature or the scope of what the investigation had already assembled. Taric Almansuri arrived at Abu Dhabi Police CID headquarters with a private attorney named Khalid Nasser who had, according to his firm's client registry, been retained 2 days after the murder. He had called a lawyer before investigators had called him. He had called a lawyer before his name appeared in any official inquiry. Al-Zabi noted both facts and said nothing about either of them when she shook his hand in the corridor. The interview lasted 22 minutes. Taric was composed, not the composure of someone relieved to have an opportunity to clarify, but the composure of someone who had already decided what he would say and was executing that decision. He confirmed he was familiar with Al Raha Mall. He confirmed he had been in Abu Dhabi on the evening of March 6th. He said he had spent the evening at home with his family, that he had eaten dinner with his wife and daughters, and that he had gone to bed before 11 p.m. His attorney noted the voluntary nature of the session twice. Taric answered each question in the measured cadence of a man who had reviewed the questions in advance and prepared his answers with the same care he applied to contract negotiations. Al-Zabi thanked them both and ended the session at the 22-minute mark without indicating what she had or had not found useful. In the corridor afterward, she told her partner Detective Saeed Al-Harti 2 things. First, Taric Al-Mansuri's right hand carried a healing abrasion across the 2nd and 3rd knuckles, fresh enough to still show slight inflammation at the edges, consistent in location with friction contact against a rough concrete surface, the kind of surface found on the painted load-bearing pillar of Bay 113 in parking level B2. Second, a man who brings a retained attorney to a voluntary interview about a commercial facility incident is a man who already knows the interview is not about a commercial facility incident. He had prepared for a question he should not have known to prepare for. That preparation was itself a form of evidence. The forensic case required more than preparation and a healing abrasion. Al-Zabi built it in sequence, each element added to the structure with the same patience she applied to everything. The prepaid SIM purchased at the Musafa kiosk, cash transaction, face partially obscured on the kiosk CCTV, physical profile consistent with a male in his mid-40s, age estimate only. The Salik toll gate records, the electronic road toll system that captured every vehicle passing its sensors, placed a silver Lexus LX registered to Taric Almansuri on the outbound Abu Dhabi road at 11:41 p.m. on the night of the murder. Al-Raha Mall was 2 minutes from that toll gate. The forensic window on Carla's time of death was 11 to 11:30 p.m. The Lexus had passed the toll gate 11 minutes after the outer edge of that window, heading away from the mall in the direction of Mohammed bin Zayed City, where Taric Al-Mansuri's villa was located. The medical record came through the warrant served on his private clinic. Taric had attended a clinic in his neighborhood on March 9, 3 days after the murder, reporting a hand wound he described to the attending physician as a household accident. The attending physician had cleaned and dressed an abrasion consistent with friction contact against a rough surface, second and third knuckles, right hand. The physician had noted the presentation in the consultation record. The consultation record now sat in Al-Zabi's case file between the toll gate data and the SIM purchase receipt. The jacket was found during the search of the villa. A dark jacket in a dry cleaning bag in the back of the bedroom closet, unworn since the dry cleaning. The bag's date stamp showing it had been collected 3 days after the murder. Forensic luminol testing of the right sleeve detected trace biological material. The material was sent for DNA analysis. The result returned a match to the reference sample taken from Carla Reyes during the postmortem examination. The jacket had been cleaned. The cleaning had removed visible trace. Luminol found what cleaning could not reach. Taric Al-Mansuri had cleaned the jacket and put it in a bag and placed the bag in the back of a closet, and it had sat there for 11 days while he attended work and conducted interviews and retained lawyers and waited for the geometry of what he had built to hold. It did not hold because of the jacket. It did not hold because of the toll gate or the abrasion or the recovered text fragments or the medical record, though all of these were necessary. It held, finally and completely, because of a chrome rear bumper on a Toyota Land Cruiser belonging to a mall employee who parked in the same bay of level B1 every evening. Al-Zabi had walked level B1 on the morning of the discovery because she had concluded on the morning of the discovery that a man who had planned the camera tampering with the precision evidenced on B2 would not have entered through the level where the crime occurred. He would have entered 1 floor above and used the stairwell. She had walked B1 to find what he had entered through. She found the stairwell camera footage showing a figure descending at 10:34 p.m. and returning at 11:39 p.m. Face not sufficiently visible for identification, back and partial profile only. She had requested forensic imaging analysis of every frame from the B1 entry footage. Not the stairwell footage, every frame, every camera on the level, for the full window between 10:30 and 11:45 p.m. The forensic imaging technician working the assignment was a methodical woman named Technician Sana Khalil, who had been with the unit for 7 years and who had a habit, which her colleagues described as exhausting and which had on 3 prior cases produced the decisive piece of evidence, of reviewing footage frame by frame rather than at standard playback speed. She was on frame 31 of the B1 entry camera, the camera mounted at the north end of the level, covering the entrance of the parking lane, when she found it. As the silver Lexus entered Bay B1 North, 04 and the driver stepped out, the chrome rear bumper of the adjacent Toyota Land Cruiser, parked at a slight outward angle because the driver always pulled in at a slight outward angle, a consistent habit documented across 14 days of parking footage prior to the night in question, reflected the arriving vehicle at an angle the driver of the Lexus had not accounted for. The reflection was small. It was partial. At standard resolution, it was unreadable. Enhanced at the maximum capability of the unit's imaging software, it resolved into a license plate. Technician Khalil read the plate, ran it through the vehicle registry, and called Al-Zabi at 11:47 p.m. on a Friday evening. The plate was registered to Taric Al-Mansuri. He had walked every bay of B2. He had identified every camera on B2. He had painted the right lens and found the right stairwell and timed the right window. He had not walked B1 with the same attention because B1 was not the level where the crime would occur, and he had not thought to consider what the vehicles already parked there might reflect. The chrome bumper of a Land Cruiser belonging to a mall employee who parked in Bay B1 North, 03 every evening and pulled in at a slight outward angle out of habit, had recorded his arrival in a 2-second reflection he did not know existed. Al-Zabi obtained the arrest warrant the following morning. She also obtained, in the same application, a second warrant, for the server equipment in Taric Almansuri's villa home office. Hind Al-Khoury had already identified the hidden partition on the shared device recovered from Carla's apartment during the standard property sweep. Al-Khoury had begun extraction and understood within the first 2 hours of processing that what she was looking at would require 2 additional weeks and a federal cybercrime specialist. She had called Al-Zabi at the beginning of the second hour. Al-Zabi had listened to the description of the archive scope, 4 locations, 19 months, cross-reference subfolders, the text file at the top of the directory, and had been quiet for a long moment before she said, "Get me everything." Al-Khoury got everything. The server in the villa home office mirrored the archive exactly, organized identically, labeled identically, the folder at the top of the directory labeled with a single letter, C. Created 19 months before the murder. The same cross-reference structure. The same dated subfolders. The same text file, 41 lines, most recent edit 6 days before Carla found it. As if he had opened it one last time and reviewed what he had compiled and closed it again and returned to his ordinary day. The glasses footage. The bedroom footage. The surgery footage. The photograph footage. All of it preserved on the villa server in perfect condition, untouched by the cleaning and the dry cleaning bag and the calculated interview and the retained attorney, because Taric Almansuri had believed the archive was invisible and had not thought it necessary to destroy what no one was supposed to be able to find. He had been wrong about that, the same way he had been wrong about the chrome bumper for the same underlying reason. He had planned for the things he could anticipate and had not planned for the things he could not. He could not anticipate a forensic technician who reviewed footage frame by frame at maximum resolution. He could not anticipate Hind Al-Khoury's recovery process on an unallocated memory partition he believed had been securely deleted. He could not anticipate Rajan Pereira noticing the Yaris had been there since the previous shift. He could not anticipate Fatima Al-Zabi standing at a perimeter for 4 minutes before she walked in, seeing the geometry of what he had built, and deciding at 7:07 a.m. on the morning of the discovery to walk every level of the mall before she left. He had built a system designed to make Carla Reyes completely visible to him and completely invisible to everyone else. The investigation dismantled it the same way it had been built. Methodically, piece by piece, without rushing toward conclusions, letting the facts accumulate until the only remaining option was the one that had been true from the beginning. Al-Zabi arrested Taric Almansuri at his office at 9:15 a.m. 6 weeks after Rajan Pereira found Carla on the floor of Bay 113. His attorney was present within 20 minutes of booking. Taric said nothing through the charge reading. He was composed in the way he had been composed throughout, not the composure of innocence but the composure of a man who had decided that silence was the last position available to him and intended to hold it. In the villa, when the search team entered, Hessa Almansuri was sitting in the kitchen. She did not ask what was happening. She looked at the table. The senior female officer who conducted the initial walkthrough would note in her report that Hessa Almansuri had the expression of a woman who had been waiting for something for a long time without knowing exactly what form it would take when it arrived. She did not ask about her husband. She asked, once quietly, if the children needed to be called out of school. The officer said not yet. Hessa nodded and looked at the table again and did not speak further. The server was seized. The jacket was bagged. The case file was now thick enough that Al-Zabi had moved it from a single folder to a box. The box sat on her desk for 11 months before the trial began. During those 11 months she reviewed it regularly, not because she doubted what it contained but because the Section 4 notation from the pathology report sat at the front of the file where she had placed it on the 3rd day of the investigation, and every time she opened the box she read it again. Carla Reyes had been 8 weeks pregnant when she walked to her car in Bay 117 with her clinic keys in her right hand. She had found the archive. She had copied the drive. She had given him 72 hours. She had been precise and organized and had done what a person of her character would do. Given someone she had trusted the opportunity to do something decent before she removed that opportunity entirely. The 72 hours he used to paint a camera lens and walk a parking level and wait. Al-Zabi closed the box each time and continued building. The trial of Taric Almansuri began in Abu Dhabi criminal court on a Monday morning in November, 11 months after Rajan Pereira found Carla Reyes on the floor of level B2 with her clinic keys still in her right hand. The courtroom was not large. The gallery held perhaps 60 people. On the first morning, every seat was occupied and there were people standing in the corridor outside who had come because the case had moved through the city in the way that certain cases move. Not through media coverage alone, but through the specific current of a community that recognized something of itself in what had happened. The Filipino community in Abu Dhabi was substantial, organized, and had been present at every stage of the investigation in whatever capacity was available to them. Vigils, consular meetings, the quiet sustained pressure of people who understood that cases involving foreign nationals required consistent attention to remain priorities. They had maintained that attention for 11 months. On the first morning of the trial, they filled the gallery and the corridor and stood in the November heat outside the courthouse entrance and waited. Taric Almansuri arrived with 2 attorneys and said nothing. He had maintained his silence from the moment of arrest through booking, through arraignment, through every pretrial hearing, through 11 months of proceedings in which his legal team spoke on his behalf, and he sat with the composed stillness of a man who had calculated that silence was his last remaining position and intended to hold it with the same methodical patience he had applied to everything else. He wore a white kandura. He sat with his hands folded on the table. He looked at the judges when they entered and did not look at anyone else unless the proceedings required it. Senior Public Prosecutor Maryam Al-Rashidi presented the opening statement in 40 minutes. She did not raise her voice. She did not editorialize. She laid the architecture of the case in sequence. Patient becomes partner, partner becomes surveilled subject, surveillance discovered, confrontation made, 72 hours given, 72 hours used to build a murder rather than a confession, and she let the sequence speak for what it was. She told the court that the evidence would establish not just what Taric Almansuri had done on the night of March 6, but what he had been doing for 19 months before it, and that understanding the 19 months was essential to understanding the night, because the night was not where the crime began. The crime began in a waiting room in Suite 204 when a man who had already decided what he intended to do sat and waited for a woman to walk past so he could study her schedule. Grace Domingo testified on the second day. She had flown back from Manila for the trial, which had required coordinating with the prosecution over several weeks and which she had agreed to without hesitation when the request came. She sat in the witness chair with the straight-backed composure of someone who has spent 11 months preparing to say the things she could not say while the investigation was still building, and who has decided that the courtroom is where they will finally be said fully. She did not look at Taric Almansuri when she entered. She looked at the prosecutor. She looked at the judges. She did not look at him once during the 3 hours she testified. She described meeting Carla in their first year in the UAE, the shared apartment, the early years of building something in a country that required building from the beginning, the particular friendship that forms between 2 people who are doing the same hard thing in the same unfamiliar place and have no one else who fully understands the specific weight of it. She described watching Carla grow the practice, the lease signing, the nameplate, the phone call to Remedios that Grace had been present for on the evening the signage went up, Carla standing in the parking lot outside the medical complex with her phone pressed to her ear and her face doing the specific thing it did when she was trying not to cry in front of anyone. She described the relationship as she had known it. A man who was older, established, attentive in the specific way that reads as being genuinely seen rather than being studied. She had had reservations. She had expressed them. Carla had acknowledged them and continued, which was consistent with how Carla handled everything. She heard what you said, she considered it, and then she made her own determination and proceeded. She described the Wednesday phone call. 9 days before the murder, late evening, Carla's voice measured and deliberate in the way it was always measured and deliberate when she had already finished the calculation and was simply reporting the result. She had found something on a shared device. She had been watched for a long time and now knew by whom. She was giving him 72 hours. She was not asking Grace's opinion on whether 72 hours was reasonable. She was informing Grace of what was going to happen and then she was going to handle it. Grace had told her not to wait. Carla had said she understood. She had said good night. Grace told the court she had sat with her phone in her hand for a long time after the call ended, telling herself that Carla was the most capable person she knew in this country and that capable people handled things. She told the court she had not called back. She said this without looking for absolution in the way she said it. She stated it as a fact the way Carla would have stated it, directly without embellishment. The prosecutor asked Grace about the final contact. Grace described it. Not a text. A voice note, sent at 10:47 p.m. on the Thursday evening. 6 seconds. She asked the court's permission to play it. The permission was granted. The courtroom was completely silent while it played. Carla's voice? Clear and unhurried. I'm going to the clinic to finish a file. Home by midnight. Sleep well. 6 seconds. The note ended. The silence in the courtroom after it ended was a different kind of silence than the silence before it. Heavier, more specific, the silence of a room full of people absorbing the voice of someone who did not know she was leaving a final record. Grace sat in the witness chair and looked at the floor for a moment. Then she looked up and continued. The prosecution's evidence was presented across 4 days. Al-Rashidi moved through it in the same sequence Al-Zabi had assembled it. The painted camera lens, the stairwell, the toll gate record placing the Lexus 2 minutes from the mall at 11:41 p.m. The chrome bumper reflection on the B1 footage resolving in frame 31 into a license plate registered to the defendant. The jacket from the dry cleaning bag. The luminol result on the right sleeve. The medical record from the neighborhood clinic on March 9th, household accident, right hand, second and third knuckles, friction abrasion, 3 days after the murder. The prepaid SIM, purchased in cash, used exclusively to call Carla Reyes 31 times in 15 days. The final answered call lasting 2 minutes and 17 seconds on a Tuesday. No answer after. The recovered text fragments, 34 messages, 14 months, the single letter T in the contact field, and 2 fragments the prosecutor read aloud in full. The first, I told you this cannot be permanent. You know what my life is. The second, Carla's response. I know what mine is. Then the archive. Al-Rashidi presented the archive not by playing footage. The court had reviewed the forensic documentation privately, but by describing its structure. The 4 location folders. The cross-referenced subfolders. The dated organization. The text file at the top of the directory, 41 lines, created 5 months before the first dinner, containing Carla's schedule and routines and the number of the bay she used at Al Raha Mall. She described the camera in the surgery mirror frame. She described the camera in the smoke alarm housing in the bedroom ceiling. She described the chip in the reading glasses, her own eyeline, her own vision captured and filed. She described the camera in the frame of the family photograph near the door of the Al Reef apartment. She placed on the evidence display 2 images. A professional photograph of Carla Reyes in her white clinic coat, taken by her clinic assistant for the practice website, composed and direct and belonging to the woman who chose to be in it. Beside it, a still from the archive, Carla at the treatment chair, working, completely unaware, taken by a camera she did not know was there. The same woman. The prosecutor let both images sit on the display for a long moment before she spoke again. She said, "These 2 photographs show you the same person. One was taken with her knowledge and her consent. One was taken without either. The defendant spent 19 months building a system to ensure that the second kind was all he ever needed. When she found the system and decided she deserved the first kind again, he took from her the only thing the cameras could never capture. The life that continues after the footage ends." The defense presented its case across 2 days. The argument was not factual dispute. The defense did not challenge the toll gate record, the jacket, the chrome bumper reflection, or the archive. The argument was psychological. A man whose 3 marriages had ended, whose diagnosis of azoospermia at 31 had foreclosed the family structure his culture and his own expectation had built his identity around, whose documented history of attachment disorder and obsessive-compulsive patterns indicated a psychology operating under compulsion rather than premeditated criminal intent. They presented the psychiatric evaluation. They presented the medical history. They presented character testimony from 3 professional colleagues who described Taric Almansuri as a man of precision and reliability who had, in their assessment, no visible capacity for violence. They argued that the surveillance system, however disturbing, was the product of a man pathologically afraid of abandonment rather than a predator planning a crime, and that the distinction between compulsive behavior and premeditated murder was legally and morally significant. Al-Rashidi addressed the distinction in her closing argument by returning to one detail. She asked the court to consider the text file at the top of the archive directory. Created 19 months before the murder. 5 months before the first dinner. Before Carla had agreed to anything. Before she had any reason to think of Taric Almansuri as anything other than the patient in Bay 3 on Tuesday afternoons. The text file had been opened and edited on multiple occasions. Its most recent edit timestamped 6 days before Carla found the archive. It had been maintained continuously throughout the relationship. It contained, among the schedule and the routines and the bay number at Al-Raha Mall, a record of deliberate study begun before the relationship existed. She asked the court, "Where is the compulsion in that file? Where is the man who cannot control himself? What you see in that file is a man who decided, before she agreed to trust him, what he intended to do with her. That is not abandonment anxiety. That is hunting. And what happened on the night of March 6th is not the tragic conclusion of a compulsion he could not manage. It is the final entry in a plan he had been executing from the beginning." The court deliberated for 6 days. The verdict was delivered on a Thursday morning. Taric Almansuri stood when the judges entered and stood while the verdict was read and showed no expression when it was finished. Guilty on all counts. Premeditated murder. Criminal conspiracy in the tampering of surveillance equipment. Obstruction of justice. He was seated by his attorney and remained with his hands folded on the table in the same position he had held throughout. The trial, through every piece of evidence, through Grace Domingo's voice note played in a silent courtroom, through the 2 photographs on the display, through the reading of the text file and the description of the camera in the family photograph and the luminol result on the jacket sleeve. He had held the same position for 11 months. He held it through the verdict. His face communicated nothing to anyone watching it, which was itself, several observers noted afterward, a kind of communication. The sentencing statement from the presiding judge was direct and without ceremony. He addressed the defendant. He said, "You did not lose control of yourself on the night of March 6th. The evidence does not support that reading and this court does not accept it. What the evidence supports is that you made a decision before this woman agreed to know you and you executed that decision with patience and precision over 19 months. And when the decision required its final execution you did that with the same patience and precision you had applied to every preceding step. The severity of this sentence reflects not only what you did in that parking level but what you built in the years before it. What you built was a cage. The sentence is life. Under UAE criminal law, the sentence carried mandatory judicial review. The review process would continue for several months. Taric Almansuri was remanded to custody immediately. He was led from the courtroom by 2 officers and did not look at the gallery as he passed it. In the gallery, members of the Filipino community who had maintained their presence through 11 months of proceedings sat in silence as he was led out. Several were holding photographs. Some of the photographs showed Carla Reyes in her white clinic coat. Some showed her outside the medical complex squinting into the sun. One showed her at what appeared to be a birthday dinner, laughing at something outside the frame, the same expression she had in the family photograph near her apartment door, the photograph he had put a camera inside. Hessa Almansuri had not attended the trial. She had filed for divorce before the verdict through a family court proceeding handled entirely by her attorneys, who had communicated with investigators on her behalf since the second amended statement in which she had withdrawn her alibi and told investigators she was going to sleep at 10 p.m. on the night of March 6th and could not confirm her husband's whereabouts after that. The divorce was granted after the verdict. She moved with her 3 daughters, 8, 11, and 15, to a property registered in her family's name. She had not spoken to media and had not been photographed since the arrest. The officers who had conducted the villa search and who had seen her sitting at the kitchen table on the morning of March 6th, pouring tea, not asking what was happening, described her consistently in the same language when the subject came up in professional conversation. A woman who had known something for a long time and had lived inside that knowledge until the knowledge became undeniable. What she had known specifically and how long she had known it was a question that belonged to her. It was not a question the investigation could answer, and it was not a question the narrative could answer either. It was hers. The 3 former wives were contacted by investigators during the trial's evidence-gathering phase for supplemental testimony. Mona provided a written statement through her attorney. She described the feeling she had tried to explain to her family when she left. The sensation of being inside a photograph, of living in a space where nothing was private even though she could find no evidence that anything had been taken from it. She had found no cameras during her marriage. The forensic team, reviewing the timeline of Taric's surveillance procurement, found no evidence of cameras installed in the marital home during any of the 3 marriages. What Mona had felt was something other than cameras, the result of living with a man who studied the people around him as specimens rather than relating to them as persons, whose attention was total and objectifying and felt, even without a lens behind it, like being watched. She left because she couldn't breathe, her statement read. I didn't know then why the air felt wrong. I know now. Rasha did not provide a statement. Her attorney confirmed that the court record of the domestic control proceedings spoke for itself and her client had nothing to add. Dalal could not be located. A secondary inquiry into her whereabouts, opened during the investigation's expansion phase, produced no confirmed information. Her file remained open at the time of the trial's conclusion. Remedios Reyes had not attended the trial in person. She had been represented throughout the proceedings by the Philippine Consular Office and a victims' rights advocate who attended every session and provided written summaries that were translated and delivered to Remedios in Cebu City by the Consular Affairs officer who had been her point of contact since the week after the murder. Remedios had made the trip to Abu Dhabi in the immediate aftermath, 7 days after the call, assisted by the Philippine Overseas Workers Welfare Administration, and had stayed for 3 weeks, attending every investigation briefing that investigators could offer her access to, asking in each one the same question. Did she suffer? She had taken Carla's belongings home with her, the family photograph from near the entrance of the apartment, the Arabic textbook with the post-it notes still tabbed at Chapter 9, the kitchen wall calendar with the appointment blocks in red and the personal reminders in blue. She had packed them carefully and carried them as hand luggage. She has not spoken publicly since the verdict. She continues to receive the monthly transfer Carla established as an automatic payment from the UAE savings account. The account closure process is ongoing. She has not requested it be expedited. Grace Domingo returned to Manila after testifying. She had arranged a leave of absence from her nursing position to attend the trial and had extended it twice as proceedings ran longer than originally scheduled. She gave 2 media interviews after the verdict and declined every subsequent request. In both interviews, she said the same things in different orders. Carla was the most competent person she had known in this country. She had built something real from nothing. She had called her mother every Sunday. She had post-it notes in an Arabic textbook she was still working through because she intended to stay, which is what you do when a place becomes yours. She described the voice note. 6 seconds, I'm going to the clinic to finish a file, home by midnight, sleep well, and said that she replayed it less often now than she had in the first months. She said the sound of Carla's voice being unhurried in those 6 seconds, being completely unaware, being simply a person finishing a thought and ending a call and going about her evening, was the thing that stayed. Not the archive, not the parking level, not the verdict. The 6 seconds of a woman who did not know she was leaving a final record of herself and left one that sounded exactly like her. Competent, unhurried, already thinking about the next thing. Suite 204 of the Khalidia Medical Complex has a different dentist practicing in it now. The nameplate changed. The waiting list belongs to someone else. The appointment blocks on the wall calendar, if there is still a wall calendar, are in someone else's handwriting. Most patients who sit in the waiting room outside Suite 204 do not know what the suite was before. Most people who walk past the door going to their appointments do not know the name that was on the nameplate for 3 years or what it took to put it there or what it cost to have it taken down. Detective Fatima Al-Zabi received a departmental commendation for the conduct of the investigation. The commendation cited specifically her decision to walk level B1 on the morning of the discovery. The decision that led to the footage request that led to technician Khalil reviewing frame 31 at maximum resolution and finding the license plate in the chrome bumper reflection. Al-Zabi said in the internal review that she had walked B1 because she believed the man who had planned the B2 camera with that precision would not have entered through the level where the crime occurred. She said, he thought about everything on B2. I walked B1 to find what he hadn't thought about on B1. He hadn't thought about the bumper. He hadn't thought about the angle of a vehicle parked by habit at a slight outward angle by someone who did the same thing every evening. He had built a system that accounted for every variable he could anticipate. He could not anticipate a mall employee's parking habit. In an informal conversation with Al-Harti several weeks after the verdict, not on the record, not in any report, Al-Zabi said the thing that had stayed with her was not the archive and not the bumper and not the jacket or the text file or the 2 minutes and 17 seconds of a final phone call. It was the family photograph. The specific detail of the camera in the frame of the family photograph. She said, Every time she came home she looked at it. She looked directly into it. The one object in her apartment that was supposed to be entirely hers. Her mother, her brothers, her own history, the place she came from before any of this, and he put himself inside it. He put himself inside the thing that had nothing to do with him and was never supposed to. That's the part. That's the part that doesn't resolve. Al-Harti did not respond. There was nothing useful to add to that. Al-Zabi closed the casebox for the last time and put it in the archive and went back to her desk and opened the next file. Carla Reyes was 34 years old. She had a 9-year lease on an apartment she did not finish living in. She had an Arabic textbook on chapter 9 with post-it notes in her own handwriting. She had a kitchen wall calendar with appointments in red and reminders in blue, and the word mama on every Sunday in the personal column. She had a practice with her name on the door and a patient list 3 weeks long and a friend named Grace who flew back from Manila to stand in a courtroom and play 6 seconds of her voice so that the people who needed to hear it could hear it. She had a mother who packed a textbook and a calendar and a family photograph and carried them home as hand luggage and has not asked the bank to close the account. She had done nothing wrong. She had been walking to her car. She had her keys. She had given someone she trusted 72 hours to do something decent. She had been precise and organized and fair in the way she was precise and organized and fair about everything. She had found a cage built around her life and had decided, in the specific way she decided all things, that she deserved better than to remain inside it. She had been right. She had been right about everything. She just did not get to live in the aftermath of being right, which was the only part of it that mattered and the only part of it that was taken from her on a Thursday night in a parking level in Abu Dhabi by a man who had decided before she ever agreed to know him that she would not be a person to him. She would be a collection. And when the collection tried to leave, he made sure it could not. The archive is in a federal evidence facility now, in a room with climate control and a case number on the shelf label. 19 months of footage. For cameras. Thousands of hours. The folder at the top of the directory still reads C. Below it, sorted and dated and cross-referenced with the patience of a man who believed that organizing something completely was the same as possessing it completely, is everything he recorded of a woman who was building a life in a country that was not the one she came from, building it one appointment block and one Arabic chapter and one Sunday call at a time. All of it filmed without her knowledge. None of it his. Not 1 second of it. Not the surgery and not the bedroom and not the street outside and not the glasses and not the photograph. Nothing he recorded of Carla Reyes ever belonged to him. The footage only ever showed what it always showed. A woman living her life privately, in the reasonable belief that her life was her own. It always was. Whatever he recorded of it, it was always entirely hers.